Welcome to this week's edition of Flashback Friday, your opportunity to get some good review by listening to episodes from the past that Jason has handpicked to help you today in the present and propel you into the future. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Holistic Survival Show with Jason Hartman. The economic storm brewing around the world is set to spill into all aspects of our lives. Are you prepared? Where are you going to turn for the critical life skills necessary to survive and prosper? The Holistic Survival Show is your family's insurance for a better life. Jason will teach you to think independently, to understand threats, and how to create the ultimate action plan. Sudden change or worst case scenario, you'll be ready. Welcome to Holistic Survival, your key resource for protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in uncertain times. Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Jason Hartman.
Welcome to the Holistic Survival Show. This is your host, Jason Hartman, where we talk about protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in these uncertain times. We have a great interview for you today, and we will be back with that in less than 60 seconds on the Holistic Survival Show. And by the way, be sure to visit our website at holisticsurvival.com. You can subscribe to our blog, which is totally free, has loads of great information, and there's just a lot of good content for you on the site. So make sure you take advantage of that at holisticsurvival.com. We'll be right back.
What's great about the shows you'll find on jasonhartman.com is that if you want to learn how to finance your next big real estate deal, there's a show for that. If you want to learn more about food storage and the best way to keep those onions from smelling up everything else, there's a show for that. If you honestly want to know more about business ethics, there's a show for that. And if you just want to get away from it all and need to know something about world travel, there's even a show for that. Yep, there's a show for just about anything. Only from jasonhartman.com. Or type in Jason Hartman in the iTunes store.
It's my pleasure to welcome Jerry Robinson. He is editor-in-chief of Follow the Money Quarterly, financial newsletter, and host of Follow the Money Weekly, and author of Bankruptcy of Our Nation, 12 Key Strategies for Protecting Your Finances in These Uncertain Times. Jerry, welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Your book is fascinating, and I want to just kind of dive right in and talk about that. Let's maybe start off with talking a little bit about the overall situation, and then dive into some of the discussion on the petrodollar and what that means to people.
Sure. Well, I mean, the book Bankruptcy of Our Nation, I don't think is really a prophetic book. Whenever I wrote the book back in 2007, I was under the impression that we were going to be in for a major economic collapse. And I was desperately trying to get the book published so we could get the word out, and no one would touch it. In fact, no one would even consider it until it was September of 2008. I was speaking at a conference out in Denver. I was talking about this very topic. In fact, the name of my speech was Surviving Financial Chaos. The market totally imploded in September of 2008, as you well remember. And when I got back from the speech that I was giving, I had 5 missed calls from my literary agent, and he said, "We have 5 offers for the book." And it was such an exciting moment for me. So we were able to, get the book published. The publisher wanted to get it out very quickly. It came out just at the end of 2008, early 2009. And the book really breaks apart what happened, what we thought was going to happen, and of course what ended up happening with the whole economic crisis, kind of explaining in layman's terms what really happened. And I think it's unfortunate that so many people today often try to formulate answers or solutions without firmly having a grasp of what the real underlying problems are. And so in the book, we lay out what these underlying problems are, i.e. Fiat money, i.e. A debt-based monetary system, i.e. fractional reserve banking. I mean, many of these things that are very faulty, they have terrible foundations, they cannot last, they're unsound, and over time, they're simply going to break down. And that was the whole message of the book. The book goes on and explains how people can take actions, to protect themselves, specific things that people can do. And so the book is a mixture of both what went wrong and what individuals can specifically do to insulate themselves from what we believe is still going to be a further downfall in the years ahead.
And what does that downfall look like when you talk about bankruptcy of our nation? I mean, obviously, we create fiat money in mass quantities out of thin air, and we can get away with this for a few reasons. Number one, every nation can get away with it for a certain amount of time, and then it ultimately becomes unsustainable and the country collapses. But the difference with the U.S. is we have the largest military in human history. We have the reserve currency, at least for the moment, and several other factors that I think do make it pretty unique. So what does a bankruptcy look like? Does it look like a collapse of the economy, or does it just look like we're inflating away this irresponsible spending that the government has been engaging in for so many decades, and especially the last 7 years? And most people are just impoverished by the inflation. Well, some are enriched by it who know how to play the game and invest for it. But what does the bankruptcy look like? What do you mean when you say bankruptcy?
Jason, what we usually refer people to is to look back to 1914 as opposed to where we are now, 2014. 100 years ago, you had a very bloated British Empire that was on its way down, and everybody knew it. And then you had this ascending United States of America that was very disarticulated. It developed the Fed in 1913. It suffered from the Panic of 07 before that. And then as we got into World War I, Europe tore each other apart, and this really benefited the United States. The United States then emerges and enters this roaring 20s era, and then has this Great Depression. And then World War II, of course, is where the United States really takes off. So it's really since the 1940s that America has really had the stranglehold, so to speak, on the global economy, and it has had that world reserve currency status. Well, it's similar to what's happening now. If we fast forward from 1914, from that picture, to 2014, we see something very similar. The American empire itself is bloated. It's overextended. It's all over the place. Our military is woefully underprepared for some of the challenges that it faces. And it simply cannot afford to take care of all the things that it wants to take care of. It's overpromised, and now it's going to underdeliver. That's exactly where the British Empire was 100 years ago. And China is the new United States, so to speak, in this picture, where here we have China rising, and you have all these complaints about, well, China certainly can't get much bigger, or certainly it's going to implode, or certainly it's going to have a problem. Well, that's what they said about the United States back in 1914. And no doubt, it was a very disarticulated time for the United States. The U.S. dollar was still being formed, and it was not nothing like it is now. It was still blocked out of many international financial markets. It took a while for the U.S. to reach its state of ascendancy and then finally reach its peak, which really came back in the 70s and 80s. Since that time, we've been on the down trend, even though it may not feel like it. And we have countries like China that are now rising to take our place. It is simply the mechanism of history, Jason, that empires rise and empires fall. I think whenever you're inside of a declining empire, you tend to either A, ignore it because you think it, maybe you can't see it because of the fog of war, or B, you think to yourself, this is going to be the worst thing that ever happened in the history of the world because it's a bit arrogant. We all tend to think that our country and our situation is the most important in the whole world. Well, we expect the U.S. to continue declining at not a precipitous rate, but at a aggravatingly sharp rate. Where I'll give you an example.
Is that worse than precipitous?
It is. Well, okay, I'll give you a perfect example. If you have a choice, and this is terribly morbid, but let's think in the terms of empire. If you have the opportunity to kill the empire by throwing it off of a cliff or by rolling it down a steep grade and letting it hit every single rock on the way down and then it dies, just throw me off the cliff, right? And I think that's what most people would say. Just throw me off the cliff. Don't roll me down the hill and make me hit every rock along the way. And that's exactly what the U.S. is doing. It's rolling down that steep grade. This is a slow, steady decline, and it's going to be not just economically challenging and economically damaging, but it's also going to be, and we're beginning to see this now, psychologically damaging. Americans can't quite come to terms with the fact that other nations may be rising or that other currencies may challenge the dollar. They just can't seem to grasp that. And I think that...
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I definitely get the idea of context. I mean, look, fish live in water, and I assume they probably don't notice the water. You know, we live in air, and thankfully, unless we live in Cairo or Mexico City, we don't notice the air, you know. And so you're right about that. I definitely see that, and there's this kind of arrogance, and, you know, there's the fog of war and all that stuff. But, you know, it's so interesting because this is such a contrast from the one interview I did yesterday with a guy named Peter Zehan, who used to work for Stratfor as a VP, and he wrote a book called "The Accidental Superpower: The Next Generation of American Preeminence," and just talks about how only because this is a relative issue, okay, America's a mess. I agree, and I agree that it's in decline. Okay, but look at the rest of the world. My God, we may be mismanaged and doing all sorts of things wrong, but everybody else has got fiat money too, and they don't have the reserve currency. They don't have the big military. They don't have the big brand name, and they don't have our geography, which I think cannot be underestimated, the geography.
Well,
but go ahead.
I think that's a good point. But again, think about America's military. I mean, America's military, the United States right now cannot afford it. Right now.
Oh, we got to get out of everyone else's business. I mean, you know, this is just absurd, acting like the world's policeman, you know, and it's usually not for humanitarian issues as we would like people to believe. But you know, that's neither here nor there. I mean, we got to, you know, Ron Paul is right. We've got to contract these military bases all over the world. It's absurd. It is every sign of empire, just like you said. I agree. You know. Well,
what makes it even worse, Jason, is the fact that it is too big, and yes, we are in too many places, and yes, we have too many bases. But what the sad part of it is that China and other countries like it are the ones that finance it. So many people take great solace in knowing that, well, you know, yes, we are pretty bad, relatively speaking, but when you look at the whole world in focus, I guess things aren't as bad as they could be. Well, the truth of the matter is exactly the opposite. It's worse than we can imagine, because what we have built, we can't afford. What other countries have built, they can afford. What we have built, we need them to pay for. And when they get tired of paying for it, then what good is that military?
Well, so tell me about that. What happens when they get tired of paying for it? You know, I mean, certainly many people, including yours truly, have said, what happens when China stops buying our debt and Japan stops buying our debt? You know, and then we've got to raise interest rates to attract investors. Well, our own, I mean, it's such a freaking Ponzi scheme. It's just, it's disgusting. But our own Federal Reserve just buys our debt instead. You know, I mean, what a scam. The whole thing's a sham, obviously. But, you know, so what? I mean, you know, how does it look when that happens, you know?
This reminds me of the 2008 and 2012 presidential elections. We just had Ron Paul on our weekly program last week.
Huge fan of Ron Paul.
Yeah. You know, he was on and we were talking, and one of the things I brought up to him was so bizarre is that all these people always tell Ron, you know, all the conservatives, especially Republicans, they have this real fond saying. They say, well, I love Ron Paul's monetary economics. I just hate his foreign policy. And
you know, he's right about his foreign policy. I mean, you know, if he would just pander a little bit, he could have won. If he would just say, look, we'll hang out in Israel, we'll do everything we're doing for Israel, and we won't let Iran get a nuke. You know, if you just would have said that, he probably would be president, and the whole country would be better off.
Well, you know, but take that logic. Take the logic of someone who says, I really like Ron Paul's in the Fed message. I like his sound money message. I just don't like his foreign policy message. When you take that and you add 1 + 1 + 1, you get a very strange answer, and that is that how in the world can you finance our foreign policy without a Federal Reserve? In other words, they want to get rid of the Fed. They want sound money, and they want to keep dropping bombs on everybody. And you see, you can't.
Yeah.
You have to have a Fed.
You can't do both.
You have to have a Fed in order to fund those wars. So
of course, and that's why the central bankers love war, and we're never going to have peace as long as the central bankers run the world, because they that it's more than the military-industrial complex. That's just the first tier that everybody sees is somewhat obvious. The real complex is the government central banking complex. That's the real thing that creates the war. They have to have the war machine. They finance both sides. It's absurd.
People just don't think about it in terms of basic incentive. I mean, when I'm walking around, in my own city, there's certain incentives that I have, and there's certain incentives that I don't have. I mean, everybody in their own life can think of, why do I get up and go to work? I go up and go to work because I need money, and those are real basic incentives that we all understand. But many times we don't apply that same logic to things like central banks. What does a central bank want? It wants to loan money to a government. How do you loan money to governments? You create a demand for loans from the government. What's the perfect way to create demand for the government for a loan? A war. So when you really back up into it, what you just said is very correct, but it's because of the incentives, and many people don't think that far. They realize that they're driven by incentives, but they forget that these guys, who are Republicans, Democrats, central bankers, whatever the case might be, they have incentives too, and usually they're contrary to what is best for this nation going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question about it. So what does the bankruptcy look like? Is it just inflation? I mean, not just. I mean, that could be really bad, obviously. But when you say bankruptcy of a country, I mean, how does it look?
Look, America is unique in the fact that it does have more wealth on paper and even in physical form than many other nations. I mean, so we are very, very, very rich, relatively speaking. And again, that means that the bankruptcy is going to first take the form of a psychological pain. It's a psychological denial. It's no, China is not getting bigger. No, China is going to fail. No, the euro is going to crash. No, the Middle East stocks can't possibly rise. No, India is not going to rise, because it's very America-centric. So there's a psychological denial, which will cause many people not to diversify their investments, not take advantage of foreign growth, and therefore they'll stay right here in the United States. And as that ship sinks, we're going to continue to see that psychological pain. But the actual physical and financial pain that's going to be inflicted is going to be, as you mentioned, inflation, in the fact that we have printed so many dollars and there's so much demand for the dollar. Therefore, the central bank has a permission slip to print money. Whenever we have a problem, think about the Alan Greenspan doctrine. The Greenspan doctrine was this. 1987, Alan Greenspan gets into the Federal Reserve. He's the chairman, and we have a big stock market crash. He cuts rates as a solution. In 1994, the tequila hangover, he cuts rates. 1997 and 1998, the Asian financial crisis, the long-term capital management debacle, all that, the Fed cuts rates. 2001, they cut rates. 2003, they cut rates. I mean, it's all they do, and they print more money and print more money. Well, over time, once that becomes the solution to everything, then you become addicted to that solution. Well, here's the problem. If the dollar itself is not in demand everywhere like it is now, then you lose that permission slip to print money. Then you can't solve the problems of the nation by simply hitting the print button, because there's nobody around the world who's willing to hold those. And that's how the whole thing works. If we can print the money and then get it out of the country, then we don't have that inflation. But what happens in a case like this is where you don't have that global demand for the dollar, because maybe people want to hold yuan, or maybe people want to hold euros, or maybe they want to hold gold, something like that. Well, then they don't need as many dollars. And as that demand for dollars goes down, so we also lose the permission slip to create an excess of supply. And here's the big kicker here. If you live in an economy, Jason, that, let's say that we live in this play economy, or this fake economy, and it has $1 million total supply. That's it. That's the total money supply. Well, you have no houses that cost $2 million. I mean, that's impossible. Everything has to cost less than $1 million. In fact, it has to cost dramatically less, because you have to spread everything out across that amount. Well, that's in essence what we have done. We have driven up the amount of money, and then we're surprised when our 401ks go up, or when our house values go up, or when we get a raise. In fact, where we are today, Jason, and this is that psychological pain I'm trying to explain. We live in a time now where the present must be the minimum people are dissatisfied if the market does not go up. Something is wrong if they don't get a raise. Something is wrong if their house value doesn't go up. Something is wrong if their IRA doesn't go up. Everything, they're addicted to the present being the minimum. Everything has to be the minimum. Everything has to go up from here. And the problem with that is that that's completely unsustainable. A, it's not how things have worked throughout history because of the gold standard. And B, that's an unsustainable model. Things cannot continue to go up in value. So here's what we say, that as we see a decline in the demand for the dollar around the world and for U.S. debt, that's going to translate into an overall deflation in the U.S. Prices. It'll begin with an inflation. You have all of these dollars come back from around the world. Perhaps it happens instantly, but I think it'll happen slowly. You have all these dollars flowing back, and then we have to suck them out. How do we do that? We suck money out of the system by raising interest rates. If you and I are driving down the road and we see a bank and they're saying, hey, we'll give you 8% a year for a CD, we're hitting the brakes and taking all of our money out of the mattress and throwing it in the bank. That's how the banking community, that's how the banking industry sucks money out of the economy to prevent high inflation. And so what they'll do is they'll suck the money in through high interest rates, and that seems to fix the problem. But we have so much excess money that we're going to have to keep doing that over and over and over again to where it's going to cause major problems with think about the $1 trillion we have in student loan debt. Think about and it's growing. Think about all the credit card debt. Think about all the adjustable rate mortgages out there. I mean, it's just a mess. And so if you get higher interest rates, that's going to be very devastating to people. And this present is the minimum kind of psychology where everything should go up. That's going to be destroyed. And in fact, it's going to be the opposite. Things will be declining and deflating back to a place of normalcy and back to a place of sanity. And that's, I think, going to be the hardest thing for people to understand, is that things don't go up anymore. They just seem to be going down every year. And that's because we have too much money in the system. It's going to have to be reduced over time because the global demand will not always exist for it. And that means that housing prices, stock prices, the amount you pay for, or the amount you get paid when you go to work, all of those things are all factors based upon the amount of money in the system. And if the money supply shrinks, so do all those values.
Right. Okay. So if the money supply shrinks, then we have deflation. If it expands, we have inflation. I mean, that's the general rule, as Milton Friedman would have said. Inflation is and is always a monetary phenomenon, or something like that. His famous quote. So you're saying that, I think the opposite will happen. I think that the government will print their way out of the irresponsible problem they've created. They'll just create more money out of thin air. And if other governments won't buy our treasuries, of course, we'll attempt to throw our weight around and bully them into it, whether by, trade agreements or visa requirements, or maybe invading the country with the military and, whatever. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying this is what goes on. Okay.
Well, I think we're on the same page there. We're probably coming at it from different angles. What I'm saying is that we are going to see a period of great inflation. It's going to be a hyperinflation of sorts. But hyperinflation never lasts forever. It always ends in a period of great deflation and revaluation. So it'll begin as a period of inflation, but the rates will have to go up in correspondence with that. And the rates, we're not going to be able to get them high enough to be able to manage the excessive amounts of money. So even if they print money, if it doesn't leave the country, they're just going to be creating more inflation, so they'll have to raise interest rates. It's a vicious cycle. So it'll begin as inflation. There'll be a big response to the inflation. And then as they raise interest rates and as the economy grinds to a halt, then we move into a period of deflation because, again, they don't have a permission slip to print money anymore. If the Chinese will hold the dollars and keep them out of our banking system, we don't have inflation. But if we print them, if the Fed prints them and they don't leave the country, that's inflation. You can't get rid of that. So they can print all they want to. If it doesn't leave the country, then you have inflation. Therefore, they'll have to raise rates, and then that will stop working. So they can keep printing, like you're saying, but there'll come a time when if the money is not demanded outside of the country, they'll be smart enough not to hit it, because they'll just be creating a terrible amount of inflation that will ultimately lead to a period of deflation as we move back to a level of sanity.
So I think one of the challenges when we're looking at this type of obviously the economy in the country is very complex, but then you take it to a global scale and it gets incredibly complex. And so what economists are trying to do is anticipate how people, countries, companies will react to various stimuli. And, like in the past 10 years, almost every prediction I've made about the economy and the real estate market has come true, except one glaring mistake I've made. And the glaring mistake is interest rates. If you asked me in 2005, would we have, significantly higher rates by 2008? Okay, I would have said yes, and I did publicly. And so I was completely wrong about this. And the reason I was wrong is because it doesn't make sense. And this isn't just about logic and math. There's so much more going on here that is perverting the incentives. And one of the things that's doing that is this giant government we have with its military and with the fact that it can kind of defy gravity and kick the can down the road. I mean, it's been doing it for a long, long time, and it's really doing it now insanely. But, who's to say, Jerry, how much, deficit and how much debt and how much unfunded entitlements for the future we can withstand? Is that number 17 trillion? Is that number 60 trillion or 220 trillion? I had Lawrence Kutlikoff on the show, and he says unfunded mandates are 220 trillion with a T dollars. The whole GDP of the planet is only about 60 trillion a year. I mean, that's insane, right? And we would all agree with that, but it doesn't exist in a rational world. I agree. If you do the math, absolutely. I mean, we should be sucking wind by now and having 25% interest rates, but it's not just math, I mean, thoughts?
Well, I would say that's certainly true. I mean, the interest rates being so low now, it again, as you even use this word, it's distorting all.
It's artificial.
And it's distorting incentives. It's distorting the overall market. It's hurting savers. It's hurting people it's punishing those who want to save. It's encouraging speculation. It's doing everything that we did in 2007. We haven't learned a single lesson from. We're just repeating it over and over and over again. And countries get a few chances to do this, Jason. They don't get a pass forever. And you already have countries like China, Russia, India, the BRICS nations who are coming together trying to say, look, we've got to come up with a different solution.
You can't blame them. We're exporting our inflation to them. They're the ones hit with it, not us. I mean, we are a little bit, but, it hurts them more. It's really unfair, It
really is. And it's becoming more exposed as to America's true intentions with all of this. I mean, back in 2000, September 24th, 2000, it was the September of 2000. Saddam Hussein emerged from a meeting with all of his cronies, and they had decided to take a gamble and move from accepting dollars for all of their crude oil to accepting euros. About 3 or 4 or 4 years later, he was hanging from a tree. And then you had Iran do something similar. You had North Korea do something similar. They said, we're not going to pay for anything except for we're only going to use euros. We're only going to buy from people who sell in euros. And then you had, Venezuela do the same thing. And then you have Bush talking about this axis of evil, these evil countries who
the people that don't participate in the central banking cartel are the evil ones, right?
Yeah. These countries
conveniently,
these countries are extremely evil. They have terrible human rights records, and therefore we need to isolate them and call them the axis of evil. By the way, ignoring Saudi Arabia, who still publicly beheads people and still has terrible human rights. If you're going to talk about human rights, I mean, Saudi Arabia tops the list, or China. But there was no mention of that because China and Saudi Arabia understand how the drill works. You use the U.S. dollar and you don't fight back. Well, China has been fighting that. Russia has been fighting that. And you're beginning to see Russia now being labeled as a part of this axis of evil. It's an evil empire. Again, this Colder War we're seeing. So it's all has to do with protecting our petrodollar system that we have built back. We built this back in the 70s after the Bretton Woods system broke down. And so, the petrodollar system now is breaking down before our eyes. Many countries are moving away from using oil for dollars and dollars for oil. Instead, they're looking for other things. China and Russia are using their own currencies when doing trade in oil. And see, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, Jason. If everybody around the world must have a dollar in order to buy oil, then it creates that artificial demand for the dollar. And that's exactly what we've done. We've created an artificial demand for the dollar that didn't exist prior to the 70s. Everybody has to have it. They don't want to have it. They have to have it. Well, what happens when that goes away? Well, suddenly you've got to figure out what to do with all these trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And if those things aren't going to be held by all these countries, they're going to have to come back here. And then we're going to have to decide either A, everything that we have is now going to have to be worth more, or B, we're going to have to suck this money out of the system and raise rates, and that's going to cause, it'll lead to a period of deflation. This is what I'm saying.
Okay, so let me just ask you about that before you go on. What you're saying is that basically if those dollars have to come back, that's because the U.S. is no longer the reserve currency. The dollar is no longer the reserve currency.
Yeah, there's no further demand. There's no need. I don't need to hold the dollar. I can hold my own currency because now I have other countries who are willing to take my currency for things instead of making me convert to a dollar. And so because all of these nations around the world with a gun to the head artificially have to prop up this artificial demand for the dollar to buy things, it's created this permission slip for the Fed. Well, anytime we got a problem, we just print money. Well, that's fine. But what happens whenever these countries begin to trade in their own currencies? They don't have to keep the dollar around. So they send the dollar back. And when the Fed hits the print button, then it doesn't go anywhere. All the money stays in the country. And that's when the game is over.
What would lead up to that? What would have to happen and what you're describing is the dollar not being the reserve currency anymore, right?
Exactly. Yeah, well, it could take on a number of things that could happen. Number one, Saudi Arabia could suddenly decide that it no longer wants to use the dollar. It's tired of the U.S. It's going to have a new deal with China or a new deal with Russia. So you could see something like that. You could see. I think Saudi Arabia, in many ways, is the linchpin that props up the dollar more than people realize. Because it.
Well, we sent our economic hitman over there to do the job years ago. So
exactly.
When Saudi Arabia was a wasteland, we turned it into a semi-modern country. I don't want to say it's modern when they're cutting heads and hands off people. It's despicable. But go ahead.
Well, of course, that'll be a very big shock, I think, for many Americans when they see bombs falling on Saudi Arabia, because they've always thought that Saudi Arabia was somehow different than all of the other Islamic terrorist regimes that are over there in the Middle East. They've always thought Saudi Arabia was our buddy. They didn't realize that it was just a backroom financial deal, that as soon as it goes wrong, the bombs are going to fall. I mean, the United States hates Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia hates the United States. That's no secret. But what is a secret is why we like each other. We like each other because they take dollars for oil and they don't complain about it. And they turn around and take those dollars and they invest them in U.S. bonds. They're called the petrodollar recycling. It's been going on for years. And so Saudi Arabia gets the whole thing and they get all the benefits. But you've got groups like ISIS now running around saying Saudi is the great Satan. They want to take it down. And so over time, when this royal Saudi family, which has really buddied up with America, when they lose power or when they change their minds, the whole balance of power in the Middle East changes, and the demand for the dollar certainly goes with it. So the U.S. is playing a very dangerous game, trying to manage all of its relationships around the world, trying to keep peace with the right people, and trying to continue to fight the other people. And in the long run, it's all going to break down. So Saudi.
Okay. So let me ask you one thing about that. So one thing you didn't address in that equation, which I agree with so far, is the fact that Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East is about to lose its biggest oil customer, because we are probably going to become an actual oil exporter pretty soon. I mean, the U.S. is so much richer in terms of oil than we ever realized, and then Canada, of course, is too. I mean, the U.S. is going to be energy independent. I mean, granted, it might be with fossil fuels, but to the chagrin of the Obama regime. But we are rich in natural resources, as you mentioned earlier, and we didn't even know it until fracking came along, and oil sands technologies, tar sands. So. who cares about Saudi Arabia? They're just gonna have the rest of the world a bunch of smaller customers after we're gone.
Well, maybe. I mean, the way to look at it perhaps differently is to say that somebody like Saudi Arabia, they create an artificial demand for the U.S. dollar because they sell their oil in dollars, and because they do it, other OPEC nations do it. So it's kind of a domino theory. If the U.S. Begins exporting oil and doesn't need Saudi Arabia anymore, then why would Saudi Arabia choose to sell all of its oil in dollars? Why not sell it in yuan? Why not sell it in a different currency where somebody's actually going to give them a benefit? And so that's the thing. We can sell all of our oil in our own currency, but if we lose all of our buddies around the world who are agreeing to doing the same thing, we're still in the same boat. So we have to, in other words, we have to have a global demand for our debt, and we have to maintain a global demand for our currency. If we don't, then we implode. And I think that's the risk that's facing Washington right now. They have to maintain this demand globally for both. And if this is the double-edged sword of the oil exports that we have. Yes, we certainly have an oil renaissance happening here, but albeit it's shale, it's not pure conventional oil. But nevertheless, we are still exporting that, and we're going to be able to export it, and we're going to do very well with that. But again, that just basically shoots all of our friends in the face who have been agreeing to take our currency for everything. So if we're now their challenger, they lose their incentive to continue to prop up our currency. So again, it's one of those things where it's a real difficult thing for the United States, and it's really going to be interesting over the next decade to see how Washington handles this going forward, especially all the oil you just brought up. It's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's going to be interesting, that's for sure. That is definitely for sure. The other wild card, Jerry, that I think it's worth discussing just for a moment is that, of course, these countries are probably pretty disgusted with the U.S. spending and the exporting of inflation. I mean, China sells stuff to us, we buy it, and then we depreciate the value of the currency. So we force them to sell things on sale to us for less than they thought they were getting, which is definitely not a cool deal for them. But it's not like the U.S. is going to sit idly by and let the whole world just decide they're going to trade outside of the dollar and not go with the Bretton Woods plan and the petrodollar plan. I mean, we're going to do something about it, right? We're going to throw our weight around and say, hey, look, if you're not going to trade in the dollar, then we're going to pressure you somehow. Maybe we'll maybe we'll blow up your satellite. Maybe we'll and this is not a friendly game, okay? Or maybe we just won't buy as much from you, or maybe we'll impose tariffs or visa requirements, or you can hurt other countries in a zillion different ways and pressure them in so many ways.
That's right. Empires don't have friends; they have subjects. And
Good point.
And America is no doubt an empire, whether maybe a reluctant empire, but it's an empire. And countries around the world, when they decide to make a change, and the United States tries to woo them back, they're going to have to do better than they have already. I mean, for example, the United States has been over there messing around in with its Asian pivot. It's over in the South Asian area, Southeast Asia, and it's been brokering deals, especially the one that's made all the headlines, the TTP. And there's been a lot of concern about the fact that China has been left out of that trade agreement. And so the United States has really just kind of shot itself in the foot. It's really not doing a great job of reaching out and embracing the emerging countries. It's been very selective with the ones that it's befriending. And China and Russia have been picking up the slack, and they have been forming relationships with many of these other emerging nations. So you're really kind of developing this bipolar world. One that supports NATO and the U.S. and the West, and another that supports this BRICS kind of development. And I think that's where you end up. You end up in a place where somebody's going to have to choose sides, that the U.S. has kind of lost its ability now to kind of come across as an honest agent or an honest broker. And I think its hand has been shown. Everybody knows now. I mean, not only that, we're spying on on all of our creditors.
That's just ridiculous.
I mean, you just go down the list and you think, gosh, when does the blowback really hit the United States? I don't even think we've even seen the blowback from the Snowden affair. I think Americans themselves are still trying to figure out what that even means. I don't think many people even know how to process that, let alone the companies around the world, the foreign corporations who have been targets of that. There will be blowback.
When you say that, do you mean NSA spying that Snowden revealed to the world?
Yeah, I should clarify. Yeah, I'm referring to the NSA spying, that's been going on, for so long. And we really haven't, imagine, Jason, if we were to find out that China was actually aggressively looking at us through our television screens as we sat and watched TV on the couch. Wouldn't we be a little upset about that? Wouldn't we have a little more distrust about China? Wouldn't we be a little more concerned? It's almost as if America just says, well, deal with it. That's just tough. We just got to protect our own. And they don't realize that these nations have feelings, and they also have their own share of wisdom. And they're going to say this may not be the best thing to be, hanging out with America the way that they're proceeding. And I think over time, you're going to have a severe blowback from that. We're already beginning to see that in the technology industry, that many of our big tech companies are running into problems because of the NSA. So I think it's just this long, slow grind, Jason, that we continue to see this downward spiral. I don't think it's a off the cliff or we run into a brick wall and it's all over. I don't subscribe to that theory. I think it's a slow grind, a terrible slow process that is humiliating both psychologically and financially. Our standing in the world is already being questioned now. There's so many different things we could talk about, but yes, it is. I think that's where we're heading.
Okay, good points. So, what should people do? We've talked extensively about the problem, and in hundreds of other episodes, I've done the same. But what's the best game plan for one to protect oneself against the problems we face?
Well, I'll tell you. I have an interesting story to share. I was living in Texas. I was living in Houston, Texas, of all places. Very big city. It's not where I'm originally from, but I went down there to start a business, was down there for some time, and about, just a few years ago, something in me just really convicted me. And, I'm sure it was the Lord. And I just sensed that I had to get out of Houston and get out into the middle of nowhere. And so my wife and I began doing research. We said, where will we move? Where will we go? And we started looking, and we figured out, we decided to move to Northwest Arkansas, based upon all these different factors that we kind of, did a little spreadsheet. We really got kind of nerdy about it, but we really wanted to figure out where's the best place to go for us and for our situation. We moved up here. We got a mini ranch. We built a garden. We're slowly getting off the grid. We have wood burning fireplaces or wood burning stoves in all of our buildings out here. We're slowly getting off the grid with water, with a well. We're doing everything that we possibly can because, Jason, I think not just the financial things that we've been talking about are a threat to the American people. But at the same time, some of the punitive damage that's going to come to America is not just going to come through the barrel of a gun. It's going to come through a cyber attack that shuts down your whole electric grid. Or it's going to come through a cyber attack that takes down your bank. It's going to come through a cyber attack that takes down your local utilities. And so currently, local utility companies, Wall Street Journal has been reporting on this ad nauseum, constantly about how many of these public utilities here in America are dealing with unbelievable amounts of cyber attacks from China, Russia, and other places like that, Iran. And so eventually one of those are going to succeed. I think it's imperative for people to be ready. If they are currently living in a city, I think they can certainly take precautions. There's some good books out there on urban survival. I'm sure you have some good materials as well.
Oh, hey, I do a whole show on it, the Holistic Survival Show. So
yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great resources. And, one of the things I want to stress, Jerry, is that this is not nutty, okay? It's nutty if you spend your whole life on it and you make it everything you do. But just, basically for about $200 or $300 per person in your household, you can gain a huge edge in just prudent, rational preparedness. This is not difficult to do, okay? Even if you live in a city, it's like the old story of two hikers. They're hiking in the woods and they see a bear and one of them they start running away from the bear and you've heard this trite story. It's a cliche, okay? And one of them stops to tighten his shoelaces and the other says, "Hey, what are you doing, man? You got to keep running." And he says, "Forget about got your shoelaces, tightening them. You can't outrun a bear. And he says, I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you.
Right.
and that's really what it is, as vicious as that sounds. You just need to outlive or out-survive the people around you, because, when you do, the resources will there will be resources available left over to some extent, at least. I think 3 days is the first magic number, and then 3 weeks is the next one, because it's 3 days. Water is, you're going to die if you don't drink for 3 days, okay, and or you're going to get close. And food, it's 3 weeks is the number, and then have a ham radio for communications off the grid. It's just some really simple stuff. This is not difficult to do.
No, it's really not. And it's really, as you pointed out, it's not nutty. I think what's nutty is buying into the whole idea of the American dream and thinking that somehow that we're not facing real serious issues and problems. I think, being awake and aware to that is vital. What are some of the things we do, Jason? We teach something called the 5 levels of financial freedom. It's completely free. People can log on to our website and see it there. It's FTM.
Give out that website.
Yeah, it's ftmdaily.com. That's FTM, like follow the money. ftmdaily.com/5 levels. And there they can.
What are those 5 levels?
Those 5 levels are the same 5 levels. What they are is they're 5 steps. They're kind of large steps with some micro things inside of them, but they're kind of the big planks, these 5 steps that we have taken, my wife and I, to financial freedom. So we call them the 5 levels to financial freedom. And we went from, literally from a 1-bedroom apartment to, where we are now. And we're much better off now than when we were. And we use these 5 levels to get there. And they involve A, diversifying your savings, B, diversifying your investments, C, diversifying your income sources, and also in along with that are basic, as you mentioned, preparatory type of actions. We talk about the need for having a go bag. We talk about the need for having food and water storage. We talk about the need for people to actually invest in a portion of their savings. Not actually invest, but take a portion of their savings and diversify it. I'll give you one example. We have something called our what we call DSL. It's our Diversified 6-Month Liquid Savings Reserve. Most people tell you, hey, you should have 3 months of liquid savings, or maybe even 6 months of liquid savings. Well, we agree, but we did a back test and a study that showed that if you will take that savings and not just throw it in U.S. dollars, but if you'll diversify it, you can really get a lot more bang for your buck. We did a study that went back 25 years that showed that if you had put your money just take your 6 months of liquidity and threw it in 3-month T-bills and just kept reinvesting them over and over again, or if you had taken that same 6 months liquidity and put 1/3 of it in the T-bills, and then taken the other third and put it into stable foreign currencies, and taken the other third, the final third, and put it into gold and silver, for a period of 25 years, the return is just outrageous. And that's even, we even took out some of the extra gains in gold and silver just to make sure it wasn't, being jacked up by that price, the price gain in metals. So that's one thing. We diversify our savings. We also diversify our investments with something we call PACE. It's precious metals. P, A is agriculture, C is commodities, and E is energy. So we talk about those areas as ways to diversify our investments against some sort of inflation. And then we also teach the absolute importance, and I think this is one of the most important things for people today, is to diversify their income streams. I don't know how many people I've met over the years who have one income stream, maybe 2 income streams. The average U.S. family today in America here is 3 income streams. Usually mom and dad have a income stream, and then there's usually some sort of CD or money market account that throws off, pennies and interest. And that's usually their 3 income streams. And then they hope to get, a few more by the time they retire. Well, we teach the importance of having many, many income streams. And so we have a income university at our website where you can learn 22 different income streams, how to create them. Now, some people have more time than money, and other people have more money than time. So some people may not be able to get all 22 income streams because they don't have, the ability. But if you have time, you can always trade it and receive money. And if you have money, you can always take that and enhance its returns and do better as well. Some people will tell you they don't have either, and those people usually have their priorities backwards. Some people will say that they that they have both, and that's of course a great place to be if you have both time and money. But all 22 income streams cover all of those different situations, whether you have too much time but no money, or a lot of money but not a lot of time. There's plenty of things that everybody can do, and I think that oftentimes we get so obsessed with trying to pay off debt, and I think that's a good thing. But oftentimes we forget that we can add on new income streams. I know.
Yeah. And let me comment on the debt thing for just a moment, if I may. And I know we're kind of wrapping up here. We've been going a while, but one of the things few people really understand, deeply, and my listeners do, because I've talked about it for so many prior episodes. But it's the idea that in an inflationary environment, and we both think we are going to see some significant inflation, okay? In an inflationary environment, debt actually transfers wealth from lenders to borrowers. Borrowers are actually enriched by debt because they pay the debt back in cheaper dollars. And if you look at what happened in the Weimar Republic, where lenders, and borrowers and the way they interacted together, you just see. And then when you put the debt against a commodity that has universal need, and my love is real estate. And so, I love getting a 30-year mortgage below the rate of real inflation on low-priced real estate, okay? That's necessity housing, not luxury housing at all. And, that throws off cash flow the day I buy it. But then the debt is debased by inflation. I call this thing, I created a little trademark term, it's a mouthful, it's inflation-induced debt destruction. And it's just an amazing phenomenon. It's like the hidden wealth creator. Yeah, and then you have a commodity, like precious metals is a commodity, because think of what little houses or apartment buildings are made of. They're made of copper wire, that's commodity, lumber, concrete, petroleum products, glass, steel. These are all things that are traded globally, not indexed to any one currency. And, I just think that's such a good equation. And then, have some metals and some other things and preparedness too, of course. But I wouldn't totally rush to pay off debt unless it's consumer debt. I like the mortgage debt because that's being paid by someone else. I don't pay my own real estate debt. My tenants do.
I think that's a really good strategy. We mentioned that too. The one caveat with that is to make sure that, your audience or whoever who follows that advice it locks it in on a fixed interest rate.
Most definitely. Never adjustable rates. No
because
way.
If you have an adjustable rate, it works against you, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're gonna get payment shock when the inflation finally does hit and the rates go up. But who knows how long they'll kick that can down the road. But yeah, when you're borrowing, I'd say real inflation now, it's always understated by the government. Real inflation now is probably 6 to 8%. Okay, in reality, although the government would have us believe it's much lower. And so if you can borrow at 4.5% for 3 decades, like someone takes out that mortgage today, they're not going to make the last payment, or I should say their tenant's not going to make the last payment until 2044. Do you know how much inflation we'll probably see in the next 3 decades?
Oh, sure.
It's insane.
Well, and Jason, I'm an economist. I do a lot of investing. I'm a real estate investor. And, people who are...
I didn't know that. I'm glad to hear it. You like real estate too?
Oh, sure. Yeah, and it's one of our income streams that we love, and we've built many different income streams, and I love rental real estate. And I love, as you said, that 30-year mortgage. I would take a 40 or a 50-year mortgage.
I'd take a 200-year if I could. Yeah, I agree.
At all, unlike Dave Ramsey and other people who say don't have any debt at all. But we do like the whole concept of real estate. But many people today, as you well know, are very happy to borrow as much as they possibly can. Some of the wealthiest people I know are borrowing to the hilt at fixed interest rates.
Oh, yeah. And borrowing specifically against a commodity that has universal need like housing.
Exactly.
That's a great deal. And of course, it's the most tax-favored asset in America, too. And, we don't even have time to go into that one. But, taxes are, the modern version of slavery. So,
oh, sure.
Yeah. If you want to really lower your tax bill, own a lot of long-term buy and hold income property.
I agree.
Just prudent, non-sexy, boring stuff and in markets markets that don't make the headlines. It's not going to be Southern California. It's going to be, you own stuff in Texas and Georgia and Tennessee. These are great markets. We love them.
Well, many of the things that we teach over at our website include things like options trading for people who, maybe want to do that, rental real estate for sure. We also talk about affiliate marketing. I mean, we have 22 different income streams. So, anybody who out there who's just wanting to add another income stream on, that's what we love to do. We love to help them.
Yeah. Good stuff. Really, really good. Jerry, give out your website again.
Yeah, it's FTM, like follow the money, ftmdaily.com.
And just remember from the Nixon Watergate days, Deep Throat said, follow the money. So there you go. Yeah, good stuff. And the book is on Amazon with 4.5 stars, good reviews. And any closing thoughts?
I would just tell people to, really keep their eyes open right now. This is, I expect the market overall to probably do fairly well as we head into the end of the year and as we head into the next year. This is historically, from the Stock Traders Almanac and from all the investors, all the different cycles that we've studied, this is usually the best time to be in the market, this third and fourth year of a presidential election or of a candidacy and the presidential cycle. And so the third and fourth year are often great times to be in the market. We also offer at our website a market barometer. We were able to step aside and get out of the market before the collapse. And I really do pride our system on catching that. I expect to see another major collapse. I don't expect it to come, within the next year. I think we're still a couple of years out, but we don't really guess at that. We have a system that tells us, called our market barometer, and it has a great track record going back all the way to the 1929 crash. We back tested it, and so people who want, maybe they have money in a 401k or an IRA, and they say, I don't want to sit through another one of these major collapses. Well, we have a market barometer that is available at our website that people should definitely check out.
Jerry, I gotta say, I'm a little surprised that you're a stock market fan. I call it the modern version of organized crime.
Yeah.
and a conservative guy like you, I would think that you wouldn't be too in favor of the stock market.
The stock market has been really good to me because I'm a trend trader. And so I trade with the trend. And so when the market goes down, I make money. And when the market goes up, I make money because I use options and I use, inverse ETFs and leveraged ETFs. And so it's been really good to me. So it doesn't really matter what the market's doing. I don't really root for the market to go up. I just root for the market to move because if the market moves, I make money. And now when the market's stagnant and stays and kind of moves in a sideways motion, okay, yeah, you're right. That's probably a bad place to be. But when it's going up and when it's going down, I can't complain. I like the market at that time.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, Jerry Robinson, thank you so much for joining us today. The book, again, is Bankruptcy of Our Nation, and check it out on Amazon and all the usual places. Appreciate you joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you for joining us today for the Holistic Survival Show, protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in uncertain times. Be sure to listen to our Creating Wealth show, which focuses on exploiting the financial and wealth creation opportunities in today's economy. Learn more at www.jasonhartman.com or search Jason Hartman on iTunes. This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company, offering very general guidelines and information. Opinions of guests are their own, and none of the content should be considered individual advice. If you require personalized advice, please consult an appropriate professional. Information deemed reliable, but not guaranteed.